Thank you so much for joining us at the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad right now to be joined by Abdullah Elagha, a Palestinian organizer with the CPC, Colorado Palestine Coalition. The CPC is a group of organizations local to Colorado that work together to educate the public on the issue of Palestine and to advocate for the liberation of Palestinians. Abdullah, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor, for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to start off with the Jewish National Fund, the organization who hosted this global conference for Israel in Colorado this past weekend. For folks listening, we're recording this on Thursday, December 7th. As it notes on the CPC Instagram page, quote, the Jewish National Fund is a Zionist organization with a 120-year plus history of dispossession and theft of Palestinian lands, ethnic cleansing and entrenching Israeli apartheid, end quote. So I was wondering if you could extrapolate more on that and walk us through some more context regarding the JNF and what that global conference this past weekend was all about.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, as you mentioned, the JNF is over 50, almost 50 years older than the state of Israel. So the JNF has been around for quite some time, and it's really taken on a lot of different shapes over that time. I know that a lot of the responses from folks who were attending the conference and folks who were setting up the conference were saying that the JNF is just a nonprofit. Well, maybe the U.S. branch of the JNF is just a nonprofit, and the Canadian branch and the British branch, as they have branches in many different countries. But the JNF, at its core, has really existed to displace Palestinians and acquire Palestinian land through any means necessary for the 120 years that it's existed. Now, it's attempted different strategies to achieve that goal over the past 120 years, but really the goal has always been the same. I think their latest strategy, or the latest shape that they have taken, is that they're an environmental organization. As a matter of fact, they tout that they are the world's oldest environmental organization, which is really hilarious, because even their environmental initiatives are not only detrimental to the Palestinian people, but detrimental to Palestinian land as well. And even land that is now considered to be Israeli land, it's detrimental to that too. A phrase that's used here very often is greenwashing. And really what greenwashing is using things like environmental initiatives to sort of hide more nefarious goals behind it. In this case, they use, for example, the fact that they plant forests, which seems like a great thing in Israel, to hide the fact that they're planting these forests atop the ruins of ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages. I don't know if folks are familiar with the blue Sadaka boxes that seem to be quite common among a lot of Jewish households. It was the kind of thing that like little kids kind of went from door to door with these blue boxes, saying, oh, hey, donate some money to help plant a tree in Israel. Oftentimes those trees were planted in these forests that were used to hide these Palestinian villages and prevent Palestinians from ever returning from that to them. I heard a lot of interesting stories from a lot of my Jewish friends who grew up with these boxes just sitting in their homes, and they really had no idea what the idea behind them was, other than, oh, we're just planting trees. And as they grew up and came to learn more about the JNF, came to realize what the idea behind them actually was and how horrible it was. So I know I jumped around a lot there, but that's kind of the idea behind our whole campaign against the JNF, is just to educate people on what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into the greenwashing a bit more in a minute, but I also want to focus on like the power that JNF has, because I grew up Jewish, and I remember seeing those little boxes, particularly at the Jewish Community Center. We didn't have one in our home, thankfully. But But yeah, they are ubiquitous. And in terms of the JNF being ubiquitous outside of just the greenwashing campaign, y'all also note that it's the largest private landowner in the state of Israel, owning 13% and effectively controlling 80% of what is considered Israeli land. So what does that translate to in terms of the political power of the JNF as that Zionist organization?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms specifically of the political power, the Israeli Land Management Bureau, I think about 50% of their members are also members of the Jewish National Fund. So they have a direct hand in managing this land, all of which was stolen from Palestinians. So let's just be very, very clear on that. Today it's considered Israeli land, but before 1947, this was all Palestinian land. So, yeah, to for them to call themselves an environmental organization or a nonprofit is really just an absolute farce when you look at their practices on the ground, when you look at their plans for the future, such as Blueprint Negev, where they're trying to basically terraform the Naqab, well, they call it the Negev, the Naqab Desert in the south of what is now Israel, which has led to the displacement of dozens of Palestinian Bedouin villages who have lived in that desert for hundreds, thousands of years. That desert is a difficult environment to survive in. If you look at population maps in the area, you will see that the desert is almost completely deserted, save for these Bedouin villages. Actually, I think it was just a couple of weeks before October 7th, Ben-Gvir, who's the security minister of Israel, he shared a photo where he was at I don't know what you would call it, but it was the process of the Israeli military literally ethnically cleansing a Bedouin village, which is part of this Blueprint Negev that the JNF is carrying out. And he posted a photo, and he was very excited about it. He was very excited about the fact that these people who live there for hundreds of years, they're probably the only people who actually know how to survive in that desert without destroying the environment, which really is what you can call it terraforming. You're destroying a native environment. They're the only people who can live there. And he was just sharing his glee in the fact that they had been permanently removed from their homes. And this just lines up with exactly what the JNF is trying to do.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're speaking, it reminds me of, you said that they consider themselves, or they say that they're the oldest environmental organization, which of course is that colonial language too, because of course, indigenous peoples across the planet have been in what one might consider an environmental organization if you consider just living in concert with the environment. But then colonialism comes in, destroys a place, and says that they're being environmentalists about it. And just picking from some of the things that y'all have shared, just the language that was used. Y'all shared a poster from the JNF from the 50s that that said that what they were doing was a, quote, conquest of the desert. I mean, and just thinking about that language, how could that possibly be conflated with something environmental or constructive for that area? And as you also noted in that post, this also is part of that colonialist mentality that, like, oh, this land was uninhabited, or at the very least uncared for, and needs these Zionists to tend to it. So I'm curious if you can share any more. You mentioned this this Negev or Naqab project. Are there others in terms of particularly like the tree planting, like with regards to ignoring native growth and trying to literally put in European plantations of trees and other such ecocidal practices?
Yeah, I think their favorite line is "a land without a people for a people without a land." And then their other favorite line is that they made the desert bloom, as if the land of Palestine hasn't been fertile and blossoming for thousands of years. Uh, you know, their environmental practices are to call them environmental practices is almost hilarious. The trees that they plant, you kind of mention it, are very often European fir trees, which are not native to the environment, which I think is a great parallel. But these trees, they plant them often on top of ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages, but other times they plant them on top of pre-existing forests that were covered with native flora. And so when they plant these invasive species, very often wildfires will break out in these areas. And I've seen some incredibly devastating photos that show, a wildfire that broke out in one of these forests that were made up of these European fir trees. And then once the fire had cleared out, underneath it, you can see the remains of Palestinian villages. You can see the remains of Palestinian farms that had been there, for hundreds, probably thousands of years, that were replaced by these invasive trees. So it's really it really lines. It sounds surprising, but it's very much in line with their practices, which their practice is just displace and erase. That's really the goal of the Jewish National Fund.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get to the events of this past weekend in particular, because it was the so-called global conference for Israel, and y'all took part in an action hashtag shut down JNF. And I'm curious if you could talk about what the global conference, what the goals of the conference were, and about some of the actions that y'all took to either disrupt or raise awareness about this.
Yeah, so the global conference is really a year. It's a yearly event that happens in a different city every year. Last year it was in Boston. The year before, and the year before that, I think it was canceled due to COVID. But really, what it is it's an international gathering of Zionists to discuss the Israeli project and to discuss furthering the Israeli project. Um, Last year in Boston, it was just one day. We had the mispleasure of them doing it here for 4 days. But since they did that, we were able to kind of get creative with our counter actions. And we did have a couple of direct actions and protests, because obviously we would protest the global conference for Israel coming to Denver in the best of times. But right now, in the midst of Israel committing genocide in Gaza, where over 20,000 have been killed, over 6,000 of them children, personally, I've lost over 80 family members over the past 2 months. I'm from Gaza. So given the fact that they're coming here now to network and fundraise in our city, while Israel is committing these atrocities, is just absolutely unacceptable. So the plan was always to have our counteractions, but as I mentioned, one of the goals of the CPC is to educate people on Palestine. So we actually had a number of educational events. We had folks fly in from all over the country. We had folks from the Palestinian Youth Movement fly out from the Bay Area and from the DC area to give a talk. We had folks from PSL National fly out from New York to give talks. We had someone from the Palestine Solidarity Working Group fly out from New Orleans to give a talk. So really, we really focused on education here, and they gave just incredible talks, which we called the Global Conference for Palestine, sort of a parallel to that. They love to steal our verbiage, so we figured we'd take some of theirs for the weekend. But it was a very successful weekend, I think. We saw some photos of the inside of the conference. it seemed to be very sparsely attended, to say the least. The opening night was supposed to be the big night. That was the night where entry was free, open to the public as long as you just registered. And videos from inside of the lecture hall where the UN ambassador Gilad Erdan and our governor Jared Polis gave the opening remarks for the conference. There was a lot of empty seats in there. I think that our march on Saturday easily had more attendees than their conference. So I would call their conference a fail. I don't think we were able to shut it down, but I think it made them look very bad. I think it made our governor look very bad. On Sunday, during our car rally, somebody spotted that there was somebody who had been attending the conference wearing an extremely racist T-shirt that called for, the murder of Arabs. I'm happy to send you that photo. It's kind of been making the rounds online. But he was standing right next to someone, wearing a Global Conference for Israel lanyard. So it seems like these are the people who our governor decided to align himself with and spend the weekend with, which is very shameful. But yeah, we would consider our actions a huge success for this weekend. And we also plan to follow them wherever they might go. Whatever city they end up in next year, we definitely plan to connect with the organizers there and make sure that the JNF knows that they're not welcome anywhere they go here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, like you said, I think so much of it is just raising that awareness with people in the community to know that, the JNF is not some benign organization. And I'm curious too, because we've talked about on the show in the past, in particular, projects like Operation Butterfly, which the whole goal was, Netanyahu working with Americans like Adelson to ensure that there was a crackdown on any kind of critique of Israel, both in thought and in action. And we see this happening across the country. Also, we see it happening in Europe. Basically, waving a Palestinian flag in Germany is basically legal. So I'm curious, with this collective effort by Israel and the United States, and indeed many parts of Europe, to make anti-Zionism illegal and solidarity with Palestine illegal, especially on college campuses, what is the status now of y'all's organization, and how are you looking ahead and organizing, understanding that it's getting to the point where it's not even safe to be in support of Palestinian liberation?
Eleanor, well, that's one way to look at it. The way I look at it is that there has never been this much energy around the liberation of Palestine ever before. There has never been this big of a collective shift of how the world sees Palestine ever. Sure, you can look at dying institutions like the mainstream media and the programs that they peddle. And it might look like we're getting buried, or we're losing, but we are absolutely the framing has shifted big time, and I think that we are starting to win the information war, despite the fact that there is a huge machine working against us. Sure, it's scary to be a student on a college campus and have your future threatened for speaking out about Palestine. I'm not a student, I'm a professional, but I had a complaint filed against me at work because of my activism and because of how outspoken I am. But we're not deterred. If the people of Gaza can survive this genocide for 2 months, we won't be deterred. If the people of Palestine can survive ethnic cleansing for 75 years, we won't be deterred. So these we see these as the dying breaths of a colonial empire, and just their last attempts to save themselves. It's funny that you mention Netanyahu and his efforts to silence dissent here in the United States. I'm not sure if you or your listeners know this, but I think 31 states have laws on the books that make it in some way, shape, or form illegal to boycott Israel. So they're anti-BDS laws, and BDS is boycott, divest, sanction. So there are anti-BDS laws in 31 states that essentially prevent you from boycotting Israel, which this is the most peaceful type of protest that one can have. There are zero laws that prevent you from boycotting American products. So it's really interesting to see this. So many. I know just here in the Colorado legislature, so many of our representatives have Israeli flags sitting on their desks. In the House of Representatives, many people have pulled up with Israeli flags, Israeli flag pins. What would be the consensus if these were Russian flags, if these were Chinese flags? I think people would be losing their heads. We have this foreign flag that's flying in almost every single one of our legislative halls. It's illegal to speak out against this foreign country. Their lobby is probably the most powerful lobby here in America, and yet we just accept that as normal. I find that very disturbing, to say the least. And I think that people are kind of waking up and starting to realize that all these pieces fit together, and the picture that is becoming clearer and clearer by the day is one of apartheid, is one of ethnic cleansing, and is one of genocide. And I do think that millions of people have been woken up to these truths, and millions more continue to wake up to them every day.
Yeah, that's incredibly well put, and yeah, we've just recently had on the show Abby Martin, who was, of course, was able to shoot down one of those such laws when she was asked to sign that before speaking, because she was literally asked to sign something that said that she was not going to speak ill of Israel, and it's like, you can't. I'm not. This is absurd. If you, again, like you said, if you replace that with any other country, China, Russia, even like a random one like Venezuela, it'd be so arbitrary and absurd. And yet we are expected as Americans to have this kind of loyalty to a country that we supposedly have no ties to. But of course, as you've mentioned, with colonialism, basically Israel cannot support itself without the support of the United States. And of course, that's why it's so important that we as Americans, whether we're citizens or residents, it's so important for us to fight the state of Israel, because we as these children of empire have a role and an opportunity to topple apartheid. So
Absolutely. And just yesterday, Netanyahu put out a statement where he said, I have 3 requests for President Joe Biden: munitions, munitions, munitions. If it was not for the material support of the United States, this genocide would have been over within the first week. Israel does not have the capacity to carry out like this. This is hysterical bombing. This is absurd bombing. It literally does not stop. Talking to my family in Gaza, they say that it literally does not stop. There is not a moment of peace. And they simply cannot keep this up without the support of the United States. So when people see us in the streets, very often they say, why are you out here protesting? How does this affect us? Even, UN ambassador for Israel, Gilad Erdan, while he was here, he gave an interview, and he said he basically was addressing us. He basically was addressing protesters and saying, why are you protesting? Do you not enjoy freedom? Well, I would say we're protesting because we very much love freedom. And people in Palestine are not free, and their struggle is completely intertwined with ours. So that's why it's imperative for us to continue using our voices and continue being out in the streets, and trying to change what is something that is very changeable for us. Joe Biden can pick up the phone tomorrow and say that this is over, and it would be over. Ronald Reagan did it in the 80s when Israel was bombing south of Lebanon. He literally picked up the phone and he said, stop, and they stopped. Joe Biden has the power to do this. he chooses instead to enable it. So that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that context as well. And so, Abdullah, wrapping up here, I'm curious, how do you feel that people can best get engaged, even folks that are not in Colorado, of course, get engaged with this? And what is the best way to follow what y'all are doing and keep in touch with regards to perhaps next year's conference and things like that?
Yeah, so for folks in Colorado, I would say to follow our Instagram page at Co-Palestine Co. That's CO, Palestine, CO, all one word. That's our Instagram page. That's our Twitter. All of our constituent organizations are also linked there. I think we're up to 25 constituent organizations, which is amazing. We've grown so much over the past few months. And we definitely will have a lot more things planned. We don't plan on stopping anytime soon. For folks outside of Colorado, the beautiful thing about what has otherwise been an absolute horror and a tragedy is that the Palestinian movement really has grown in the United States. There are organizations popping up everywhere. So I guarantee you, wherever you are, there's an organization nearby. And I would really just implore people to get involved and get organized. Join a local organization, even if it's not strictly a Palestinian organizations. Lots of human rights organizations and more left-leaning organizations are very much in support of all liberation. So I would recommend that people just get organized and get more connected with their community. Our division is their strength. So we really need to be as united as ever, as connected as ever in this struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And for my fellow Jews out there, I know that I've mentioned this on the show before, but Jewish Voice for Peace does great work, and they have chapters all over the place. So check that out. And Abdullah, thank you so much for taking the time to putting all this in context, and for sitting down with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And I am going to shout out Jewish Voice for Peace, Denver Boulder chapter. They are absolutely incredible people. They held an amazing action this past weekend. It was actually at the exact same time that the JNF was holding a press conference here in Denver at the convention center, where they were calling us anti-Semites and saying that we were attacking Jews. Right outside of that, 16 Jews were arrested for protesting for Palestine. So, the writing is on the wall, and I just really want to shout out my Jewish siblings. Y'all have been doing incredible work, especially in the arena of decoupling Zionism and Judaism. So thank you to all my Jewish siblings, and thank you to you, Eleanor, for taking the time today to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.